The Corellian homeworld burned beneath a crimson sky as Admiral Zephyr watched from the bridge of her dying flagship. Around her, the proud fleet that had defended their system for 3 centuries lay scattered like broken toys across the void. The Devourers had come without warning, their black ships emerging from hyperspace like hungry shadows. "Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from the surface," her communications officer reported, his voice barely steady. "The cities, they're gone. All of them." Zephyr's 4 arms trembled as she gripped the command rail. The Corellians had been guardians of this sector for millennia, protecting dozens of younger species from the threats that lurked in deep space. They had thought themselves invincible with their energy shields and quantum weaponry. They had been wrong. The Devourers were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships seemed to absorb energy weapons, growing stronger with each attack. Their hulls regenerated from physical damage within minutes. Worse still, they consumed everything in their path: planets, stars, entire civilizations, converting matter into fuel for their endless hunger. "Send a message to all allied worlds," Zephyr commanded, her voice gaining strength. "Tell them the Corellian defense fleet has fallen. Tell them the Devourers cannot be stopped by conventional means." As her ship shuddered under another assault, Zephyr made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days ago. She opened a channel to the restricted frequencies, the ones reserved for the most desperate of circumstances. "This is Admiral Zephyr of the Corellian Republic, broadcasting on all emergency channels. Our worlds are lost. Our fleets are destroyed. The Devourers advance toward the galactic core, and nothing we possess can stand against them." She paused, knowing her next words would change everything. The galaxy had rules, ancient agreements about which species could be contacted and which were too dangerous to awaken. But with extinction staring them in the face, those rules seemed meaningless. "We have heard the legends, the whispers of a species that sleeps beyond the rim. They call themselves humans, and the old records speak of power that defies understanding. If any of these humans still exist, if they can hear this transmission, we beg for your aid. The galaxy is dying, and you may be our only hope." The signal raced outward at faster-than-light speeds, piercing through dimensions and carrying with it the desperate plea of a dying civilization. It crossed the vast emptiness between galaxies, seeking something that many believed was only myth. On a small blue world orbiting a yellow star, buried deep beneath layers of concrete and steel, ancient sensors stirred to life for the first time in 10,000 years. The message was received, analyzed, and forwarded to those who had been waiting in the shadows of space and time. Humanity had been watching. Humanity had been preparing. And now, finally, humanity had been called to war. In the depths of space, hidden fleets began to move. Ships that had waited in silent vigil for millennia powered up their engines. Weapons that could crack planets hummed with deadly energy. The sleeping giant had been awakened, and it was not pleased with what it saw. The Devourers had made a critical error. They had threatened the galaxy that humans had sworn to protect, even if that galaxy had forgotten they existed. Now they would learn why humanity had once been feared across 1,000 worlds, why their very name had been whispered in the dark corners of space as both blessing and curse. The desperate signal had gone out. Humanity was answering with power none would challenge. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the UES Retribution, watching the stars wheel past as her ship emerged from the quantum tunnel that had carried them across the galactic void. Behind her, 1,000 other vessels materialized from hyperspace, their hulls bearing the ancient symbol of United Earth, a blue marble wrapped in silver wings. 10,000 years, she murmured to herself, remembering the last time humanity had shown itself to the galaxy. Back then, they had been conquerors, spreading across space with the fury of a species that refused to accept limits. They had carved out an empire that spanned half the galaxy before something had changed them, made them withdraw to the outer rim and beyond. "Ma'am, we're receiving status reports from the fleet," her tactical officer announced. Lieutenant Commander Torres was young by human standards, barely 200 years old, but he had trained his entire life for this moment. "All ships report ready for combat operations." Sarah nodded, her augmented eyes scanning the tactical displays that floated in the air around her. Each ship in the fleet was a masterpiece of human engineering, built with technologies that the current galactic civilization couldn't even imagine. The smallest destroyer carried enough firepower to level a continent, while the dreadnoughts could crack moons with their primary weapons. Analysis of the enemy forces, she asked. Based on the data from the Corellian distress signal, we're looking at a completely biological enemy, Torres replied, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. They absorb energy, regenerate damage, and seem to grow stronger through consumption. Standard galactic weapons are ineffective. Sarah smiled, and there was something cold in the expression. Good thing we don't use standard galactic weapons anymore. The bridge fell silent as crew members processed her words. They all knew what humanity had become during their long exile. While the rest of the galaxy had stagnated, content with technologies that hadn't changed in millennia, humans had pushed the boundaries of science itself. They had learned to manipulate matter at the quantum level, to bend space-time like clay, to reach into dimensions that existed only in mathematics. Set course for the Corellian system, Sarah ordered. Maximum velocity. And send a message to Admiral Zephyr's survivors. Tell them help is coming. As the fleet accelerated, reality seemed to blur around them. They weren't moving through space so much as convincing space to move around them. The journey that should have taken weeks was completed in hours. A feat that would have amazed the greatest scientists of the current galactic age. When they dropped back into normal space near the Corellian homeworld, what they found was carnage beyond imagination. The once beautiful planet was a blackened husk, its surface stripped of all life. Debris from the destroyed defense fleet drifted in silent clouds, testament to a battle that had been hopeless from the start. But the Devourers were still there, their organic ships clustered around the dying world like carrion feeders. They were massive things, kilometers long and covered in what looked like living tissue. As Sarah watched, one of them extended feeding tendrils toward the planet's core, draining the last of its thermal energy. "My God," whispered Torres. "They're eating the planet itself." "Not anymore, they're not," Sarah replied. She turned to her weapons officer, a veteran named Jackson whose cybernetic implants glowed softly in the bridge's dim lighting. "Mr. Jackson, you may fire when ready." "With pleasure, ma'am." The first shot from the Retribution's main cannon was a thing of terrible beauty. It wasn't a laser or a particle beam or any weapon the current galaxy would recognize. Instead, it reached across dimensions and convinced a small portion of the target that it no longer existed. The Devourer's ship simply vanished, leaving behind only empty space and the confused screams of its fellows. Across the fleet, similar weapons opened fire. Reality warfare had come to the galaxy, and the Devourers were about to learn that they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could ever be. The tide of battle was turning, and humanity had barely begun to show what they could do. The Devourer swarm recoiled in confusion as their ships began disappearing one by one. These creatures had consumed entire star systems, had faced the combined might of galactic civilizations and emerged victorious every time. Nothing in their vast hunger-driven existence had prepared them for weapons that simply erased targets from reality itself. Admiral Zephyr watched from her damaged flagship as the human fleet deployed in perfect formation around the dying Corellian system. She had expected help, but nothing like this. The human ships moved with impossible grace, their hulls shimmering with energy fields that bent light itself. When they fired, there was no flash of lasers or explosion of missiles. Their targets simply ceased to exist. "Admiral, we're being hailed by the human fleet," her communications officer reported, his voice filled with awe. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the face of Commander Sarah Chen. To Zephyr's surprise, the human looked remarkably similar to the ancient records, though her eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of experience. "Admiral Zephyr, I am Commander Chen of the United Earth Fleet. Your distress call has been received and acknowledged. We're here to end this threat." "Commander, I must warn you," Zephyr began, her voice heavy with the weight of recent losses. "These creatures are unlike anything we've ever faced. They absorb our weapons, heal from our attacks. Our entire fleet couldn't even slow them down." Sarah's expression remained calm, almost serene. "Admiral, your weapons work by adding energy to a target. Heat, kinetic force, electromagnetic radiation. You're trying to destroy something by feeding it. We take a different approach." As if to demonstrate her point, another wave of human ships emerged from hyperspace. But these weren't warships. They were massive construction vessels, their hulls bristling with machinery that defied easy description. As Zephyr watched in amazement, they began to work. The humans weren't just destroying the Devourer ships, they were rebuilding reality around them. Space itself seemed to flow like liquid as the construction fleet went to work, creating barriers that the organic ships couldn't cross, pockets of altered physics where the Devourer's biology simply couldn't function. "How is this possible?" Zephyr whispered. 10,000 years of advancement, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. While the galaxy grew comfortable with its current level of technology, we kept pushing. We learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Matter, energy, space, time, they're all just different expressions of the same underlying reality. One of the larger Devourer ships, a creature the size of a small moon, attempted to ram through the human barriers. Instead of breaking through, it found itself trapped in a bubble of compressed space-time, its movement slowing to a crawl as temporal fields wrapped around it like chains. "We also learned something else during our time in exile," Sarah continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "We learned why we withdrew from the galaxy in the first place. We were too dangerous, too powerful. Every problem we tried to solve with force only created bigger problems." The trapped Devourer ship began to change, its organic hull shifting and transforming as human science worked on it at the molecular level. Instead of destroying it, they were converting it, turning predator into protector. "So we made a choice," Sarah said. "We would only return if the galaxy truly needed us. If the threat was so great that our intervention was the only alternative to total extinction. We've been watching, waiting, hoping we would never be needed." Zephyr felt a chill run through her as she began to understand the true scope of what she was witnessing. These humans hadn't just advanced their technology, they had become something beyond the understanding of current galactic civilization. They were gardeners tending to reality itself, capable of rewriting the laws of physics as easily as changing the color of a flower. "But now we're here," Sarah continued, "and we're going to make sure this threat never troubles the galaxy again. Not just by destroying it, but by ensuring it can never exist in the first place." The human fleet began to spread out across the system, their reality manipulation technology working on scales that boggled the mind. They weren't just fighting the Devourers. They were preparing to erase the very concept of them from existence. For the first time since the invasion began, Admiral Zephyr allowed herself to hope. But she also felt a deep primal fear of the beings who had come to save them. News of humanity's return spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On 1,000 worlds, ancient archives were opened and forgotten histories were dusted off. The elder species remembered the humans, remembered why their ancestors had been so careful never to provoke the sleeping giants beyond the rim. On the Vorthan Council Station, Ambassador Kethvar watched the tactical displays with growing unease. The reports coming in from the Corellian system defied all understanding. The humans weren't just winning against the Devourers, they were rewriting the fundamental nature of the conflict itself. "They're not destroying the enemy ships," reported his aide, a young Vorthan whose spots flickered with nervous energy. "They're converting them, turning them into something else entirely." Kethavar's tentacles curled in distress. He had access to the deepest archives of his people, records that went back 50,000 years. He knew why humanity had vanished from galactic affairs, and he knew what it meant that they had returned. "Send a priority message to all council members," he commanded. "Emergency session. We need to discuss the implications of human reemergence immediately." Meanwhile, in the Corellian system, the transformation was accelerating. The converted Devourer ships now moved in perfect harmony with the human fleet, their organic hulls restructured into something beautiful and strange. What had once been engines of consumption were now vessels of creation, their biology rewritten to heal instead of harm. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as her fleet's reality shapers worked their impossible science. Each human ship was crewed by beings who had transcended the normal limitations of their species. Genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancement, and quantum consciousness expansion had turned them into something that was still recognizably human, but far beyond their ancestors' wildest dreams. "Ma'am, we're detecting massive Devourer reinforcements approaching from the galactic edge," Lieutenant Commander Torres reported. "Thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands. They're converging on our position," Sarah nodded calmly. This was expected. The Devourers were a hive mind, and the loss of even a small portion of their fleet would draw the attention of the entire swarm. That was exactly what humanity had been counting on. "Signal the Nexus fleet," she ordered. "Tell them it's time for Phase 2. In the depths of space, far beyond the galactic rim, Something stirred that defied all conventional understanding. The Nexus fleet wasn't made of ships in any traditional sense. Instead, it was a collection of artificial universes, pocket dimensions that humanity had constructed as their ultimate weapons. Each one contained its own physical laws, its own reality that could be projected into normal space when needed. The first Nexus unit materialized near the approaching Devourer swarm like a cancer in space-time itself. It was a sphere of absolute black, a wound in reality that hurt to look at directly. When it touched the lead Devourer ships, they didn't just die, they ceased to have ever existed. The ripple effect spread backwards through time, erasing them from history itself. But even as the Nexus weapons did their terrible work, Sarah felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. This was why humanity had withdrawn from the galaxy, not because they were afraid of other species, but because they were afraid of what they themselves had become. "Commander," Torres said quietly, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. The major powers are demanding to speak with our leadership. They want to know our intentions." Sarah almost smiled at that. "Our intentions? We intend to save them, whether they want to be saved or not. And then we intend to disappear again before we become the very thing we're fighting against." The irony wasn't lost on her. Humanity had developed the power to reshape reality itself, but with that power came the terrible temptation to use it for their own purposes. They had seen what happened when a species believed itself destined to rule the galaxy. They had no intention of repeating those mistakes. "Prepare the containment protocols," she ordered. "Once the Devourer threat is neutralized, we begin the withdrawal sequence. The galaxy doesn't need gods, it needs gardeners. And gardeners work best when no one notices they're there." The great battle was reaching its climax. But for humanity, the real challenge wouldn't be defeating the Devourers. It would be walking away from the power to rule everything they had just saved. The final battle for the galaxy's survival began not with the roar of engines or the flash of weapons, but with silence. The massive Devourer swarm had arrived at the Corellian system expecting to find easy prey. Instead, they found something that challenged their fundamental understanding of existence itself. The Devourer Queen ship was a living mountain of flesh and metal, larger than most moons and possessed of an intelligence that had consumed the knowledge of 100 civilizations. She had led her children across the void between galaxies, following the scent of life and energy that beckoned from this rich spiral of stars. Nothing had ever stood against her for long, but as her swarm approached the human fleet, something impossible happened. Space itself began to change around them. The stars shifted position, gravity flowed in new directions, and the very concept of distance became meaningless. The humans weren't fighting them in normal space. They were dragging the battle into dimensions where human will became physical law. Commander Sarah Chen felt the weight of command as never before. Around her, reality bent and twisted according to carefully calculated algorithms. Her ship existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, each one designed to counter a specific aspect of Devourer biology. It was beautiful and terrible, a dance of physics that would have driven earlier generations of humans insane to witness. "Queen ship is attempting to adapt," reported her weapons officer. "She's learning from our attacks, evolving countermeasures." "Expected," Sarah replied. "That's why we're not just attacking her. Jackson, begin the metamorphosis protocol." What happened next would be spoken of in whispers for thousands of years to come. The human fleet didn't try to destroy the Devourer Queen ship. Instead, they reached into the quantum foam of space-time itself and began to rewrite her at the most fundamental level. Not just her biology, but her very nature as a living being. The Queen ship screamed across dimensions as she felt herself changing. The hunger that had driven her species for eons began to transform into something else: curiosity, wonder, the desire to create rather than consume. Her children felt the change rippling through their psychic links, and one by one they began to stop their advance. Admiral Zephyr watched from her damaged flagship as the impossible unfolded before her. The greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced was being converted into something beautiful. The Devourer ships began to bloom like flowers, their dark hulls splitting open to reveal cores of pure light. Where once there had been engines of destruction, now there were instruments of creation. "This is what we learned during our exile," Sarah said, her voice reaching every ship in the combined fleet through quantum entanglement. "Power without wisdom leads to destruction. We could have simply destroyed the Devourers, wiped them from existence with weapons that unmake reality itself. But that would have made us no different from them, just another force of consumption in the universe. The transformation accelerated as more human ships arrived, each one carrying reality-shaping technology that boggled the mind. They were rebuilding the Devourers from the inside out, turning predators into gardeners, destroyers into creators. It was the ultimate expression of human ambition, not just to win, but to transform the very nature of conflict itself. But even as victory became certain, Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She could see the way the galactic representatives were looking at the human fleet, the mixture of awe and terror in their communications. They were grateful for salvation, but they also feared what humanity had become. "Ma'am," Torres said quietly, "the Galactic Council is requesting immediate negotiations. They want to discuss humanity's place in the new galactic order." Sarah almost laughed at that. A new galactic order with humanity at its head, exactly what they had spent 10,000 years learning to avoid. "Tell them we'll speak when the crisis is over. And prepare the withdrawal protocols. We're not staying." The converted queenship had become something magnificent, a living vessel of pure creation that began immediately to heal the damage her children had caused. Planets that had been stripped bare began to bloom with new life. Civilizations that had been consumed were reconstructed from quantum shadows. The Devourers had become the galaxy's healers, but Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The real test would come when they had to resist the temptation to stay, to rule, to impose their vision of perfection on the galaxy they had just saved. Power corrupted, and absolute power corrupted absolutely. Humanity had learned that lesson the hard way, and they wouldn't forget it again. 3 months after the last Devourer ship had been transformed, Commander Sarah Chen stood once again on the observation deck of the UES Retribution. But now, instead of looking out at a battlefield, she saw something beautiful beyond words. The former Devourer fleet had become a vast garden of living ships, each one tending to the wounds the galaxy had suffered during the invasion. Worlds that had been stripped to their cores now bloomed with new life. The converted Devourers worked tirelessly to restore what their hunger had destroyed, guided by their transformed queenship who had become a being of pure benevolence. It was healing on a scale that defied imagination, a miracle that would be remembered for millennia. But Sarah felt no joy in the victory. Instead, she felt the weight of a decision that would define humanity's future once again. "The Galactic Council has sent another delegation," Torres informed her. "They're requesting a formal audience with our leadership. They want to offer us membership, leadership roles, territorial concessions. They're calling us the saviors of the galaxy." Sarah nodded grimly. It was exactly what she had expected and exactly what humanity had to avoid. Already she could see the signs. Some of the younger human officers were beginning to believe their own legend, talking about the responsibility that came with their power, the duty to guide the galaxy's development. "Ma'am," Jackson added, "there are also reports of some galactic civilizations attempting to reverse engineer our technology. The Altarians have been studying the quantum signatures left by our reality weapons. And what do our analysts predict will happen if they succeed?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Catastrophic failure. Their understanding of quantum mechanics is about 10,000 years behind ours. Any attempt to replicate our technology will likely result in the destruction of their home system. Sarah closed her eyes. This was the other reason humanity had withdrawn. Not just to avoid becoming tyrants, but to prevent other species from destroying themselves trying to match human capabilities. Power had to be earned, understood, accepted with full knowledge of its consequences. It couldn't simply be copied. "Signal the fleet," she commanded. "Begin the final phase." What happened next had been planned from the moment humanity decided to answer the galaxy's call for help. The human ships began to change, their reality-shaping technology turning inward. They were erasing themselves from history, removing every trace of their presence from the galaxy's databases and memories. Admiral Zephyr felt a strange emptiness in her mind as the process completed. She remembered the Devourer invasion, remembered her desperate call for help, remembered salvation arriving, but she couldn't quite recall who had answered her call. The memories were there, but fuzzy, as if she were trying to remember a dream. "Admiral," her communications officer said, looking confused, "we're receiving a message from someone. The sender's identification is corrupted." The view screen flickered to life, showing Sarah Chen's face one last time. But already the image was beginning to fade, becoming indistinct as the memory wipe took effect. Admiral Zephyr, this is our farewell. The galaxy is safe. The threat has been neutralized. The former devourers will continue their healing work. But they will not remember how they were transformed. Neither will you in a few minutes. Zephyr struggled to speak, to ask the questions that burned in her mind. Why? Why erase yourselves from history? You saved us all. Sarah's smile was sad but resolute. Because salvation that comes with strings attached isn't salvation at all. Because power concentrated in one species' hands inevitably leads to tyranny, no matter how benevolent the intentions. And because the galaxy deserves the chance to grow and develop on its own terms, without gods looking over its shoulder. The image began to fracture as the memory erasure completed its work. Remember only this: when the galaxy faces its darkest hour, when extinction threatens and hope seems lost, call out to the void. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, someone will be listening. Someone will answer. The transmission ended and Admiral Zephyr blinked in confusion. She was standing on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at a vista of unprecedented beauty. Living ships that had once been her enemies now worked to heal the wounds of war. The Devourer invasion was over, though she couldn't quite remember how victory had been achieved. Admiral, her tactical officer reported, our analysis of the converted enemy vessels suggests they were transformed by an unknown technology. The quantum signatures don't match any known galactic civilization. Zephyr nodded slowly. Unknown benefactors, then. Someone helped us but chose to remain anonymous. She paused, feeling the weight of cosmic mystery. Make a note in the official records. When the galaxy faced extinction, help came from the void. We may never know who they were, but we owe them everything. Far beyond the galactic rim, the human fleet completed its withdrawal to the spaces between dimensions. They would watch as they always had. They would wait as they always did. And if the galaxy ever again faced a threat beyond its ability to handle, they would answer. The desperate signal had gone out. Humanity had answered with power none could challenge. And then, as quietly as they had come, they disappeared back into legend, leaving behind only the miracle of a galaxy saved and the promise that someone, somewhere, was always watching over the children of the stars.